What you're about to hear is a non-profit fan reading of A Mug of Recaff by Sandy Mitchell. All copyrights and rights reserved to the original author. A Mug of Recaff, written by Sandy Mitchell, read by Adam White. If anyone had asked Jurgen, which they never did, he would have said the operation had been a great success. As usual, Commissar Kane had outwitted the heretics they were hunting with ease, leading the squad of guardsmen assigned to escort him straight to the heart of the coven, while the bulk of the raiding force provided a diversion by attacking the heavily fortified stronghold of the renegades. After a short, intense firefight, most of the cabal lay dead. The few panicked survivors, too intent on fleeing for their lives through the corridors of their leader's mansion to put up any further resistance.
"Went rather well, sir,"
he ventured, as the commissar sheathed his chainsword while making the odd little twitch of the nose, as he so often did. As always, Kane had made sure he was in the thick of the action, and must be in dire need of a pick-me-up by now. Fortunately, Jurgen had noticed the kitchen during their initial assault through the servants' quarters, and was sure he could find his way back there. As soon as the commissar was engrossed in discussing how best to sweep the building for stray cultists with the sergeant in charge of the escort detail, he slipped quietly away in search of it. The layout of the rambling house was a little confusing, but he found the object of his quest easily enough by the simple expedient of following the trail of combat damage. The path back to their entry point was marked by lasbolt pocks on the walls, many of which had charred the hanging tapestries or scored the intricate marquetry surfaces of the occasional tables scattered about the place. Most of these had once held ceramics, few of which remained intact, particularly around the scorch marks on the carpet and the widespread cratering of walls and furniture where frag grenades had gone off. Before long, the opulent furnishings gave way to the starker, more utilitarian environs of the servants' quarters. Though Jurgen didn't expect to meet any of the staff, most of them had fled screaming as soon as the armed guardsmen appeared, the ones that hadn't being cut down in short order, alongside the masters whose corruption they'd shared. Too seasoned a campaigner to take anything for granted, Jurgen remained alert, his lasgun held at the ready. The cultists who'd escaped retribution upstairs were almost certainly long gone, but it was always possible that a few had gone to ground, hoping to slip away quietly once the noise had stopped. So musing, he caught sight of his objective at last, the light gleaming from neatly shelved pots and pans visible through a half-open doorway. He was about to walk through it when he hesitated, listening intently. Someone inside was speaking, the voice rising and falling in the unmistakable cadences of a chant. "Hela, Hela Shela, Hela Shela, Hela Ho." Jurgen had no idea what it meant, but he didn't really need to. It sounded like warpcraft to him, which boded badly for the Emperor's loyal servants still in the building. It might even inconvenience the commissar, redoubtable warrior though he was. Better put a stop to it now, he supposed. Besides, he needed the kitchen. Too bad for the heretic currently occupying it. Readying his lasgun, Jurgen dashed through the door, his eyes flicking left and right in search of a target. He'd been right. Someone was practicing warpcraft. A tall, elegant man in expensive-looking robes and far too much jewelry was waving his arms about in time to the stream of gibberish gushing from his lips. His eyes seemed to flicker with balefire as he glanced up at the unexpected intrusion, and his mouth twisted into a grimace of distaste, as though Jurgen was something he'd just found on the sole of his shoe. The guardsman's finger tightened on his lasgun's trigger, but before he could squeeze it, the air between them ripped, sounding, he thought, like the galaxy's biggest fart. Smelled like it, too. Something consisting mainly of eyes, mouths, and teeth stepped through the rent in reality and lashed out at him with 6 whip-like tentacles. "Finish the scum!" the sorcerer said, disdain dripping from his words like protomatter from the flesh of the newly incarnate warp thing.
"Works for me,"
Jurgen said, holding down the trigger of his lasgun. The demon spawn reeled back, keening its distress as the hail of lasbolts chewed its midsection to pieces. It was far from the first such thing Jurgen had encountered in his years of fighting at the Commissar's side, and in his experience they were never as tough as they made out to be. Apparently, that was something the Emperor had gifted him with. Inquisitor Vale had tried to explain this a couple of times, but she used a lot of long words that made his head hurt, and he didn't really care anyway. The fact that it worked was enough for him. After a couple more bursts from the lasgun, the warp spawn suddenly vanished, with a pop of imploding air, driven back to the eldritch realm from which the Psyker had torn it, just as Jurgen had known it would be. He turned, taking in the rest of the kitchen in a single rapid glance. The Psyker was still standing in front of the stove, an expression of stupefied astonishment on his face, muttering another string of arcane syllables. Livid green witchfire flared around his upraised fist, then flickered and died as Jurgen took a step towards him.
"You can frack off and all,"
Jurgen said, and shot him, wiping the stunned expression off the man's face with a single lasbolt. He slung the weapon as he stepped over the sorcerer's spasming corpse, freeing his hands to pick up the kettle, which gurgled as he shook it. Already full. That was a bit of luck. The Commissar would definitely be needing a mug of Recaff by now, and Jurgen meant to see that he got it.